In every neighborhood, there are secrets. Some hidden behind closed doors, others buried so deep you'd never imagine they exist. I've lived through unsettling encounters with neighbors who seemed ordinary on the surface, but harbored darkness just beneath. From a man digging at night under the shadow of suspicion, to teenagers wielding real guns with threats that chilled me to my core, to mentally unstable neighbors whose screams could pierce the quiet of the night. Every experience left me questioning who you can really trust when the people next door aren't what they seem.
5 years ago, something happened in my neighborhood that I still can't stop thinking about. My next-door neighbor, Charles, though most people called him Charlie, came to our house one afternoon looking completely devastated. He told my wife and me that his 14-year-old son had gone missing. The police were called immediately, and within hours the story was everywhere. Local news, social media, flyers on telephone poles. The entire neighborhood was shaken. My wife and I felt horrible for them. We offered to help search, handed out flyers, and checked nearby woods and parks with other volunteers. For weeks, the entire community was focused on finding that boy. But they never did. Months turned into years with no answers. Eventually, the search party stopped. The flyers faded and tore away in the rain. Life slowly moved on, even though the mystery never did. During those years, Charles and his wife Kathy were never quite the same. Kathy became extremely quiet and distant. She barely spoke during neighborhood gatherings. Charles, on the other hand, seemed constantly nervous, almost jumpy, like he was always worried about something. Every summer, they would still invite us over for small backyard barbecues. We would sit, eat, and make small talk. But there was always a heavy feeling in the air. No one ever mentioned their missing son anymore. It felt like an unspoken rule. Then, last week, something strange happened. I was taking out the garbage when Charles suddenly walked over and asked if he could borrow a shovel. He said he needed to do some work in his backyard and promised he would return it the next day. Without thinking much about it, I went to my shed and gave him my best shovel. At the time, it seemed like a completely normal request. But about 20 minutes later, while I was upstairs near a window that overlooks his backyard, I saw something that immediately made me uneasy. Charles was digging. Not a small hole for gardening or a fence post. A huge one. The hole looked deep, and he seemed to be struggling with the work. After all, he's 56 years old. Watching him struggle made me feel a little bad, so I grabbed my second shovel and decided to go help him. But the moment I stepped into his yard and called his name, everything changed. Charles looked up, froze, then hurried toward me. No, it's okay," he said quickly. "I've got it. Please, just leave." His reaction completely caught me off guard. I told him it wasn't a big deal, and that I was just trying to help. But his expression suddenly hardened. "I will not allow you to use that shovel in my backyard," he said firmly. Then he pointed toward the gate as if he were ordering a dog to leave. I was so shocked by how aggressively he reacted that I didn't argue. I just turned around and walked back home. But something about the whole interaction felt very wrong. When I got back inside, curiosity got the better of me. So I went upstairs to the same window and started watching his backyard again. And what I saw next only made things stranger.
From my upstairs window, I kept watching Charles in his backyard. He continued digging for another 30 minutes. The hole was now deep enough that most of his body disappeared below the ground whenever he climbed inside it. Every now and then he would stop, lean on the shovel, and look around the neighborhood as if checking whether anyone was watching him. His behavior made me uneasy. Eventually, it looked like he had finished digging. He stepped out of the hole and wiped sweat from his forehead. Then he slowly looked around again, this time much more carefully. He even glanced up toward the neighboring houses, toward my house. Before I had time to step away from the window, his eyes locked directly onto mine. For a split second, we just stared at each other. I tried to act casual and slowly stepped away from the window as if I had only been passing by, but my heart was already racing. Something about the entire situation felt suspicious. After that, he stopped digging. For the rest of the evening, I checked the windows several times, but Charles never returned to the hole. That made me think he knew I had been watching him and was waiting until nighttime to continue whatever he was doing. And I was right. At around 1:30 in the morning, I woke up to a faint but unmistakable sound. Metal striding dirt. A shovel. I quietly got out of bed and went to the window, but it was too dark to see anything clearly. The backyard was covered in shadows. So I decided to do something that, looking back now, might not have been the smartest decision. I quietly slipped outside. Moving slowly across my backyard, I approached the fence that separates our properties and carefully peeked over. There he was. Charles was in the hole again, digging. The sound of the shovel hitting the dirt echoed in the quiet night. He seemed focused, almost frantic, throwing dirt over his shoulder as quickly as he could. Then, suddenly, he stopped. He climbed out of the hole and walked back into his house through the back door. That was my chance. Without giving myself time to think it through, I climbed over the fence and quietly stepped into his backyard. My heart was pounding so loudly I was afraid he might hear it. I approached the hole slowly. The moonlight barely illuminated the ground, but it was enough for me to see something that immediately made my stomach drop. At the bottom of the hole, partially buried in the dirt, was a piece of a black garbage bag. Just a small section sticking out. I stood there staring at it, my mind racing. I looked back toward his back door, then back at the hole, then back at the door again. I must have repeated that motion 3 or 4 times, debating whether I should dig a little and see what was inside the bag. Part of me desperately wanted to know, but another part of me suddenly felt terrified. So I made a decision. I ran back to my yard as quietly and quickly as I could, and it turned out that decision may have saved me, because only seconds later, Charles came back outside.
I had barely made it back into my own yard when Charles stepped out of his back door again. If I had stayed in his yard even a few seconds longer, he definitely would have seen me standing near the hole. But something about his behavior immediately struck me as strange. He didn't return to the hole. Instead, he walked to the side of his house and disappeared into the darkness. I waited for several minutes, watching carefully from behind my fence, but he never came back. Eventually, I quietly went back inside my house. My heart was still pounding. I tried to go back to sleep, but the image of that black garbage bag at the bottom of the hole kept replaying in my mind. I couldn't stop thinking about what might be inside it. The next morning, the first thing I did was walk upstairs and look out my window toward Charles's backyard. The hole was gone, completely filled in. The ground looked freshly packed down, like nothing had ever been there. But something else caught my attention. Charles's SUV was no longer in his driveway. It was parked on the street. I had no idea what happened during the rest of the night, but a disturbing thought began forming in my mind. What if that garbage bag contained something terrible? What if it was his son? For all I know, Charles might have dug up something he buried years ago, something he didn't want anyone to ever find. Maybe he realized I had seen him digging and decided to move whatever was in that hole somewhere else. Maybe he loaded it into his SUV and drove off in the middle of the night to dump it somewhere far away. Of course, all of this is just speculation. Maybe I'm completely wrong. But the thought has been haunting me ever since. I haven't told anyone about this, not the police, not even my wife. Charles never returned my shovel either, and honestly, I'm too afraid to ask him for it. In fact, he's been avoiding me ever since that night. But yesterday something happened that scared me even more. By coincidence, I happened to glance out my window toward Charles's house, and there he was, standing at one of his windows, looking directly into mine. The moment he realized I saw him, he immediately shut his blinds, and this happened in the middle of the day. Now I can't shake the feeling that Charles knows something. Maybe he knows I saw the hole, maybe he knows I went into his backyard, or maybe he knows that I know something terrible. And honestly, I have no idea what I should do.
I've lived in 3 different houses in my life. The first house was where my family lived for the first 15 years of my life. After that, we moved to another house where we stayed for about 7 years before I eventually moved out and started living on my own. The experience I'm about to describe happened in that first house when I was 15 years old. At the time, my family had already decided we were going to move within a few months. Looking back now, I'm very grateful we did. Our family was never particularly friendly with the neighbors. We mostly kept to ourselves. Next door to us lived a father and his 2 sons. Their names were Eric and Todd. Even though they had lived next to us for years, my younger brother and I had only spoken to them maybe once or twice in our entire lives. It was strange, considering we were about the same age. One afternoon, my younger brother and I were outside playing basketball in our driveway. Out of nowhere, Todd walked over from his yard and started talking to us. At first, the conversation seemed normal. I don't remember everything we talked about, but the first thing he asked was whether it was true that my family was moving soon. I was the one doing most of the talking since I was the older brother. My younger brother, who was 5 years younger than me, mostly stayed quiet. Todd looked about my age, though I never actually asked him. Near the end of the conversation, Todd suddenly invited me to go with him and his brother to shoot BB guns by the river in the woods down the road the following day. I didn't think much of it at the time. It was the weekend and I didn't have anything planned anyway, so I agreed. Right before Todd walked away, my little brother nervously asked if he could come too. Todd shrugged and said, "Yeah, sure." Then he turned around and walked back to his house. The next day, about an hour before sunset, Todd and his brother Eric rang our doorbell. We answered the door quickly before our parents could, because we hadn't exactly told them where we were going. That was the first moment things started to feel strange. Todd and Eric were both dressed in camouflage clothing, almost like they were going hunting. One of them carried a large duffel bag slung over his shoulder. My brother and I kept exchanging glances as we walked down the street with them. The seriousness in their expressions felt odd for something that was supposed to be just shooting BB guns. A couple of times we almost laughed, but something about their behavior stopped us. They barely spoke during the walk. Eventually, we reached the woods near the river. That's when things started getting really uncomfortable. Todd dropped the duffel bag onto the ground and unzipped it. At the same time, Eric snapped a branch off a nearby tree and angrily threw it into the river. My brother and I looked at each other again. This time, we definitely weren't laughing. Todd reached into the bag and pulled out 2 guns. He handed one to me and one to my brother. And then he said something that instantly made my stomach drop. "These aren't BB guns," he said. "They're real."
For a moment, I thought Todd was joking. But then Eric reached into the duffel bag, pulled out another gun, and without saying a word, aimed it across the river and fired. The loud crack of the gunshot echoed through the woods. Birds scattered from the trees. That was the moment I realized Todd wasn't kidding. Those guns were real. A rush of anger and panic hit me at the same time. I immediately turned to my younger brother and grabbed the gun out of his hands. He looked confused and scared, clearly unsure what was happening. I placed both guns back into the open duffel bag. "We're not doing this," I said firmly. Todd's expression immediately changed. "So what?" he said. "You're scared?" I ignored the comment and grabbed my brother by the arm. "We're leaving," I said. Eric stopped firing and slowly turned toward us. Both brothers stared at us with cold expressions. For a moment, nobody said anything. Then one of them muttered a curse under his breath. We didn't respond. My brother and I simply turned around and started walking back toward the road as quickly as we could without running. My heart was pounding the entire way home. I had always suspected those 2 were strange kids, but this confirmed something was seriously wrong with them. When we got home that night, we told our parents at the dinner table that the boys next door were really weird and that we didn't want to hang out with them again. But we never mentioned the guns. Looking back now, I don't even know why we kept that part a secret. Maybe we were afraid of getting in trouble for sneaking out. Maybe we were just too confused to process what had happened. But that decision turned out to be a mistake, because later that night, something happened that scared me more than anything ever had before. I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. A cold breeze was blowing across my face. At first I was confused. Then I realized something was wrong. My bedroom window was completely open. I sat up slowly, still half asleep, trying to figure out what was going on. And that's when I felt something hard press against the back of my head. A gun, right behind me. Then I heard a voice whisper quietly in my ear. "Shh." Even now, I don't understand how I managed to stay calm in that moment. But
Somehow I didn't scream. I didn't move. I just froze. A second later, I recognized the voice. It was Todd.
Todd stood behind me in my dark bedroom, with the gun pressed against the back of my head. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. In a low whisper, he spoke again. "If you ever tell anyone about the guns," he said slowly, "especially my dad, I'll come back and kill you and your whole family." His voice sounded calm, but there was something deeply disturbing about how serious he was. My hands were shaking. "Okay," I whispered back. That was all I could manage to say. For a moment, there was complete silence in the room. Then Todd pushed my head forward slightly with the gun, almost like a warning, before stepping away. A few seconds later, I heard the quiet sound of my window moving again. He climbed out the same way he had come in. I sat there frozen in the darkness for several minutes, too terrified to move. Eventually, I got up and closed the window, then laid back down in bed, staring at the ceiling until morning. But that wasn't the end of it. Over the next few months, something incredibly disturbing kept happening. Almost every night, I would look across the yard and see either Todd or Eric standing at one of the windows of their house, watching. Sometimes they would be staring directly into my room. Other times they would be looking into my younger brother's room. Their behavior became even stranger as the date of our move got closer. Then, about a week before we moved away, things escalated again. One night around 1 a.m., a loud crack suddenly hit my window. A rock. Startled, I got out of bed and cautiously walked toward the window. When I opened it and looked outside, I saw Todd standing in the yard below. He was pointing a pistol directly at my window. My entire body froze. For a split second, I thought I was about to die. I dropped to the floor instantly, expecting to hear a gunshot. But instead, I heard laughter. Loud, cruel laughter. Todd and Eric were both outside, laughing hysterically. One of them shouted an insult at me while they continued laughing like it was the funniest thing in the world. That week, there were 2 other times when they harassed either me or my younger brother in different ways. By that point, I couldn't wait to leave that house. And finally, we did. Moving away was the biggest relief of my life. Even after all these years, neither my brother nor I have ever told anyone about what those boys did or the threats they made. All I know is that something was seriously wrong with them. And it's probably a very good thing that we got out of there when we did.
This happened about 2 weeks ago. I recently graduated from college and moved into my own house. It wasn't exactly the place I dreamed of living in, but it was the only house I could afford at the time. Unfortunately, that meant living in a pretty rough neighborhood. The neighbors on one side of my house blast music almost every night, but honestly, they're not even the worst part. The neighbors on the other side of my house are the ones that truly make me uncomfortable. 2 women live there. One of them appears to be in her 60s. She's extremely unfriendly and barely speaks to anyone in the neighborhood. The other woman is younger, maybe in her 40s, but she clearly has some kind of severe mental disability. I'm not sure what their relationship is. Maybe mother and daughter, maybe caretaker and patient, but their behavior is unsettling. Sometimes when I sit on my front porch, I'll see the younger woman having what looks like a complete breakdown in the yard. She rocks back and forth while screaming loudly and making strange noises. During these episodes, the older woman usually stands behind her, holding her arms tightly and trying to calm her down. But the strange thing is that sometimes the younger woman will suddenly look straight at me. She'll point in my direction and mumble things I can't understand. Every time that happens, the older woman looks over at me too, and the expression on her face always seems irritated, like my mere presence annoys her. After a while,
the whole situation started making me uncomfortable enough that I would just go back inside whenever it happened. Still, I tried to ignore it, until one night when things got much worse. It was a normal evening, and I had gone to bed early because I had work the next morning. But sometime later that night, the noise from next door became impossible to ignore. The younger woman was screaming louder than I had ever heard before. Furniture sounded like it was being thrown around, and the older woman was yelling too, sounding stressed and angry. This went on for nearly an hour. Finally, I'd had enough. Frustrated and exhausted, I got out of bed, walked next door, and knocked loudly on their front door. A moment later, the older woman opened it. "What the hell do you want?" she snapped. Trying to stay polite, I explained that the noise was extremely loud and asked if they could please keep it down. Her reaction was immediate. She raised her eyebrows and tilted her head downward, clearly annoyed by my request. Before she could respond, the younger woman suddenly rushed into the living room behind her. She was screaming the same phrase over and over again. "How dare you? How dare you?" The older woman quickly grabbed her arms to hold her back before she could come closer to the door. Then, without saying another word to me, she slammed the door in my face. I stood there for a moment, confused and a little embarrassed. But at least the screaming stopped. So I went back home and climbed into bed again, hoping the night was finally over. Unfortunately, that was only the beginning.
After the noise finally stopped, I was able to fall asleep. But it didn't last very long. When I suddenly woke up again, the room was still dark. I looked over at the clock on my nightstand and saw that it was only 3 a.m. For a moment, I felt relieved. At least I still had a few more hours to sleep before work. I laid my head back on the pillow and tried to relax. But just as I was about to fall asleep again, I thought I heard something. A faint sound coming from downstairs. At first, I assumed I was imagining things. Still, I got out of bed and quietly walked over to my bedroom door to listen more carefully. The house was completely silent. After a few seconds, I convinced myself it was nothing and returned to bed. About 20 minutes later, I woke up again. This time, I didn't know what had woken me. The room was still dark and quiet. Then I heard it. A soft sound coming from somewhere inside my room. My body instantly tensed. Slowly, I reached over to my bedside table and grabbed my phone. I planned to turn on the flashlight, but suddenly I felt too scared to do it. Instead, I held the phone in my hand and slowly looked around the dark room. I checked every corner, the closet, the desk, the doorway. From what I could see in the dim light coming through the window, it didn't look like anyone was standing in the room. For a moment, I almost convinced myself I was just imagining things again. Then I heard the sound once more, and this time I realized exactly where it was coming from. Very slowly, I turned my head toward the side of the bed. At first, I saw what looked like a dark circular shape pressed against the wooden frame of my bed. It was so dark that I couldn't immediately tell what it was. My hands were shaking as I finally turned on my phone's flashlight. The beam of light revealed something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't an object. It was a face. The younger woman from next door was crouched beside my bed, and she was staring directly at me.
The moment I turned on the light, she screamed. It wasn't a normal scream. It was loud, wild, and completely unhinged, like something from a horror movie. My own scream echoed immediately after. I scrambled out of bed, tripping over the corner of my mattress as I tried to get away. She lunged toward me, screaming incomprehensible words, but I managed to slam my bedroom door shut just in time. My heart was racing so fast I thought I might pass out. I ran down the stairs as quickly as I could and locked the door that led to the upstairs bedrooms. From behind the door, I could hear her pounding and screaming nonstop. The sound of her voice was terrifying, something primal, almost animalistic. I called the police, my hands shaking uncontrollably. While I explained the situation, the older woman from next door appeared at the door. She pleaded with the officers to let the younger woman go, explaining that she had mental health issues. The officers didn't budge. They said the younger woman would have to spend the night in custody for her own safety and the safety of others. I told them everything that had happened as best I could.
While the younger woman was being taken away, the older woman shot me a look, an expression filled with pure hatred. It was like she blamed me for everything. I didn't press charges, but that stare didn't leave my mind. A few minutes later, I saw her get into her car and drive away, still staring at me as she did. Even after that night, they both still live next door. I seriously considered moving out, but moving again isn't easy, especially in my current financial situation. Now, every time I see the older woman, I get a chill. She clearly despises me. And the younger woman, she is dangerous, terrifying, and completely unpredictable. Living next to them has made me realize just how unsettling it can be to have neighbors you can't trust or who might actively want to harm you. Every night, I can't shake the thought that something like that could happen again. And honestly, I'm terrified.